One thing I was thinking about is that I recently interviewed an executive from a fabric company, and she suggested that hospitality design is borrowing a lot from residential right now in terms of color and fibers being used. And I was wondering if what you would say to that. Do you agree?
I do to a certain extent, although I would tell you that definitely hotels these days are going for a residential kind of vibe in their properties. But the challenge for us always is like, you look at all these beautiful magazines and you see these pictures of these wonderful, like white living rooms in people's homes. And either they never drink red wine or they never have a lot of guests. But like that's a big no-no in the hotel world, as you probably can imagine. Um, there's a very interesting kind of challenge of trying to create that residential characteristic without, causing a problem, because clearly maintenance and cleanability and not even, maintenance is probably like the highest thing on the list. How something can hold up, how well can it be maintained? And even if, like, for example, I know I shouldn't use any brand names, but there's lots of great new fabrics on the market that are very cleanable. You can throw them in the washing machine. But if you think about hotels, having to do that on a very frequent basis is not a good thing. So, and then again, you also don't want to make a hotel room be, if you did everything in black, it would be fine. You'd be able to it would hold up perfectly, but it would be pretty dismal. So, so it is an interesting conundrum that we are facing these days.
Sure. How has the hospitality design industry changed since you began working in it?
Well, I'll tell you one very significant thing. It used to be back in the day that the brands, and you can imagine the brands, they're still the same brands. Their philosophy was, if you're sleeping in our hotel, regardless of where you are, we want you to know you're in our hotel. And that was true of all the brands, all the really big brands. That changed dramatically. Probably it started maybe 15 or more years ago, when suddenly they started to recognize that sense of place is really takes precedent over knowing you're in a particular brand. And it's much more important now. I think the brands really feel strongly that the design of any particular one of their properties, regardless of where it is, first and foremost has to reflect its location. Then it still has to have sort of the amenities or the characteristics that you would come to expect from a major brand. But I think that's one of the reasons that boutique hotels have become so popular, and all the unbranded properties is because they have their own character, they're individual, they have personalities. And I think the big brands started to recognize that. And some of the big brands actually do have unbranded properties too, because they try to satisfy everybody.
Would you attribute some of that to the emergence of Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Airbnb?
Airbnb definitely had an influence on that. One of the things I think that Airbnb really has done is it's created a much greater demand for what we call in the hospitality industry extended stay properties. Extended stay properties always, they usually have something resembling a kitchen. It may not be the kitchen in your house, but a kitchen that you could prepare meals in. Those kinds of properties used to be mostly in the 3-star or even the 2-star neighborhood. Now you're seeing extended stay properties that are going all the way up to 5-star. And I think that's something that the hotel industry has done as a result of Airbnbs. They're trying to compete with those.
And then when you start working on a hotel's redesign, or something that already exists, what does that conversation sound like as opposed to creating something from scratch? How much of your own spin do you put on an existing brand?
Well, the first thing you always do, and I would tell you right now, the vast majority of the projects we're doing are renovations, because the cost of building a new hotel these days is pretty, it kind of limits who can do them and where they are. The first thing you want to know is, what is it we're trying to accomplish? Is it just refreshing? And I don't mean to put that down. Is it refreshing? a product that exists and have it be the same as it always was, but just newer and nicer? Or are we what we call repositioning it? Are we wanting to increase rates? Are we trying to reach a different market? Are we trying to extend our market? Are we trying to? Sometimes we get hired to, we'll start with a hotel that's a particular brand. I'm using a name, and don't take this as an advertisement. It could be a Hilton or a Marriott or a Hyatt, and it may be like a lower end brand of that particular brand. It could be a lower end product, and they want to put it more into the higher end, the more luxury, because they can get higher rates. There's always that. Sometimes the owners will have because the interesting thing about the hotel business, most of the time, the owners who we tend to work for and the brand are two totally separate companies. So there's always this yin and yang between what the brand wants and what the owner wants and what the owner's willing to spend, because the brand asks for the, as they say, they ask for the moon, but the owner has to pay for it, and they may not want to pay for the moon. They may want to pay for going halfway to the moon, so there's all of that. But it's interesting. Repositioning properties is very, very interesting because, if you think about it, typically you can't really change the size of the hotel room. It is what it is, but you can change how it feels when you go inside of it. And it takes a lot of really creative design thinking to make something feel totally new and different within this same box.
What do you make of hotels like the St. Regis or the Four Seasons starting to open up residences as part of the hotel? Do you work on any projects like that?
Yes, and it's interesting. I was in a meeting yesterday with people that are clients of mine already, and they were actually asking me, they have an independent project, and they were asking me whether I thought they should add residences. And I said, well, you've got an interesting dilemma because they're not branded. If I go and buy a Four Seasons or a St. Regis, I'm buying a brand. Those got started largely by the developers because the cost of building a hotel, as I mentioned, is quite high. And having that residential product available, and it's, it makes sense even in, it makes sense in the city and it makes sense in a resort, helps to pay for the hotel. It's another means of obtaining, capital. And the other thing that's interesting, for example, I'm speaking to you right now from my home, which is in the Napa Valley. There's a new Four Seasons right near, just like a mile and a half from here, that opened about a year and a half ago. It has branded residences. It also has a hotel. The branded residences are in, if you're willing to allow them to do it, they're in the hotel rental pool. So I come to stay at this particular hotel. Maybe my daughter's getting married or something's happening and we want to have a house. We don't want just a hotel room or a suite. And by having these branded residences, they can offer you a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can stay in. And the people that own the branded residences, if they're not in them all the time, it gives them a little, money to help offset the cost of having that property.
Sure.
So it's a win-win.
You mentioned you're in Napa now. You also have offices in LA, in San Francisco, and in London. So Correct. What is the connection to each of these locations? And I'm curious to know if what advice you would have to a designer who maybe wants to expand a firm. At what point do they decide to pull the trigger on opening an office in another city?
Well, that's a very complicated question to answer. I would tell you that over the years, I'm trying to think if there was ever a reason that we opened an office as a result of a project somewhere else. And I would say yes and no, probably more no than yes. It's usually more a function of having the opportunity to be able to create business there, but also have it's very important, at least in the design world to me, to have a person or persons that are kind of in sync with you wherever you are, and you being the management, that you feel could represent your firm in another location. Because I mean, one of the things about doing hotels, it really, I mean, designing hotels requires a lot of travel on the part of the designer. And, you know, when we're interviewing for new staff, we always say, are you willing to travel? And, you know, if the answer is no, we're really not going to be particularly keen to engage you as an employee, simply because you got to go sometimes. You just don't have a choice. But on the other hand, there's also, you know, like a limit. You don't want to burn people out totally. So having offices in various locations so that you at least have a local presence has tremendous value, but you got to have the staff.
Mhm.
And, you know, at least in the case of our office, we have really not had an opportunity where we had somebody say, you know, I've decided to move to New York City. You know, do you want an open office there? I'll be happy to go and represent you. It does happen, and it happens pretty frequently, but it hasn't happened in our case.
Interesting. What are some of the biggest challenges in designing a hotel, or what are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way?
First and foremost is, you know, understanding that you're working. It's quite different from residential design in the sense that it's a business. You have to keep reminding yourself, I have all these great ideas. I want this to be beautiful. I want it to be lovely. I want it to be this. I want to be that. But if it doesn't make money for your client, it's a failure. You know, plain and simple. It's got to make money. And you've got to keep reminding yourself of that, because you can get very carried away. That's probably the cardinal rule of the design, you know, the hospitality design business. After that, creativity is wonderful, but you also have to remember, besides the fact that it has to make money, it has to be, timeless is a boring word, I think. You know, timeless is like, yeah, okay, I get it. It could, you know, so's the airport, but that doesn't mean you walk in and go, gee, that's a swell looking space. So doing something that's a little exciting, but not something that's going to date, which of course leads back to the word timeless, is important. I mean, it's great when you can have, you know, when you can design a hotel that people are very excited about, and they see it and they're like, wow, this is cool. But is it going to be, wow, this is cool 5 years from now? That's kind of a challenge, you know, for a designer to be creative enough, but not so creative. It's not fashion, you know. You can wear your dress for one season and afford to maybe, if you hopefully replace it or give it away. But in the hotel industry, stuff's got to have legs.
So to that point, how do you consider trends? And are there any trends that you're seeing on an industry-wide level, not just aesthetically, but as far as how the industry is operating?
Yeah, you know, there's no question about the fact that as time has gone on, and this goes back again to cost, you'll find new hotels being built are becoming smaller and smaller simply because of the cost of construction per square foot, and creating, you know, how to create spaces that still don't feel like you're just squashed into a cell. That's something that, you know, heretofore we weren't necessarily that driven by. The other thing that's had a huge effect, and I'm talking really about hotel rooms, I'm not, public areas is a whole different thing, but in hotel rooms, the other biggie is, you know, accomplishing electronic, you know, maximum connectivity, maximum convenience. I mean, it used to be you'd go into a hotel room and there would always be a desk. Well, I got to tell you, the newest hotels, a lot of them don't have desks anymore, because, you know, you're in your room and you're sitting there with your laptop. You could be sitting in a chair, you could be sitting in the bed. You can, you know, you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different world. It's a really different world. And, you know, you might, when was the last time you ever stayed in a hotel room and picked up the hotel telephone? We're even, I mean, like, I've actually worked on projects lately where people are going, owners are saying, do we really need a telephone? I mean, maybe it's just an intercom so you can call the front desk and say, hey, you know, my air conditioning won't go on. But do you ever make phone calls from your hotel room? All of that has changed dramatically. You know, it's a very different world in terms of designing hotel rooms and even public areas. You know, how many times have you been in a hotel lobby? You see people sitting there with their laptops or their cell phone, and they're looking for a place to plug it in so they can recharge it, or when they're sitting having a drink, and sure as heck, they want to plug in someplace so they can recharge. So, I mean, the one thing I haven't heard any hotel owner comment about, I mean, they always say, make sure we got plenty of plugs for everybody. I've never heard anybody say, and I'd be curious to know if it's affected the hotel electric bill.
Great question. Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll poise
if you
that.
interview a hotel owner, you got to ask them.
That's really interesting. Yeah, we'll find out for you.
I'd like to know that one.
One thing Cole Martinez Curtis is known for is your emphasis on wellness. So what is your approach to designing wellness spaces, and how does sustainability factor in?
Well, I would say number one, wellness. Frequently, you know, we really spend time thinking about how to make the hotel guest feel, I mean, even if it's not a spa hotel or a hotel that's specifically designed for wellness, like, you know, the Canyon Ranch Retreat, which probably they sent you pictures of. If it's just a hotel per se, and I don't mean to demean it, I mean, if it's a hotel per se, you still want the guests to feel good and you want them to feel well. And how exactly to make that, you know, to deliver that message, there's a certain kind of serenity you want to imply. You want to make people feel that they're not, you know, that you're respecting our environment. I mean, I know that's gotten to be kind of a cliche, but taking care of our surroundings, representing them, and making people feel good is all kind of part of what we are challenged with these days. And it's particularly, I think, more challenging as a designer to do that in an urban setting. You know, you're in a hotel room in Manhattan. How do you make people feel a certain sense of calm and serenity when they go into their room, even though they're in New York? And you still want them to know they're in New York, but that's an interesting kind of a balance that you have to strike. And that kind of leads back to your first question, which was about making them feel more residential. You want people to feel comfortable. Comfort is really critical, you know, and wellness is sort of part of that comfort.
Was there a hotel that you stayed at that made you say, I want to do this, I want to design hotels?
Was there a hotel? No, you know, it's funny. I got into hotel design kind of by accident, but it wasn't the result of staying in a hotel that made me want to veer into that direction. I had kind of a funny experience. We had, this was obviously some time ago, a client who bought a hotel. I did office buildings for him. He used to buy like old kind of grade C office buildings and want to turn them into grade A office buildings. And it was kind of like, how do you reposition this to be more attractive to office tenants? And they were obviously, I mean, not obviously, but all of the buildings that he owned or bought were urban. So he bought a hotel in downtown Dallas, the Adolphus, and his first idea was he was going to convert it into an office building, and he couldn't get permission to change the usage from the city of Dallas. And he was already a client of mine, and he said to me, so how would you like to design a hotel? Because we can't make this into an office building. And I said, sounds like an idea to me. And that was how we got started in office interiors. I mean, in hotel interiors.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
Do you have a favorite project or a project you found particularly rewarding?
Usually I'm most in love with the latest stuff we're working on, I would tell you. I mean, we've done projects. I still have a sentimental attachment to the Adolphus because it was the first hotel I ever did. And there are a number of other projects like that we've done along the line. The Hotel Valley Ho, which was a brand new, it was a conversion of an old Ramada Inn to a kind of edgy, you know, mid-century property. It was the first mid-century hotel that I'm aware of that had a very high profile that in the United States anyway. I have a great fondness for that. The Lodge at Sea Island, which we did kind of at the same time, which is supposed to feel like it was there forever, and it did. Those are kind of things that you remember for a long time.
What else influences how you design? It could be places traveled or cuisines, anything.
I travel a lot. I enjoy traveling. I love seeing new things. I'm an art collector, and I'm also a foodie. So all of those things kind of go into the pot. Exactly how or when, I don't know. But I've always believed that art is an additive in one's life. And, I respect and admire many, many artists and the struggles that they have in their own, endeavors. And to the greatest extent possible, I like to support artists. And I feel the same about creative chefs and cooking. It's a very hard work. It's a very hard work to be a great chef. And, I love exhibition kitchens because it makes the chef the star. I think that's just a great thing, to sit in a room and have somebody deliver a plate to you really isn't anything close to the whole story. Being able to watch everything that's going on that made that happen on your plate, I think it's like theater.
I'm also a huge foodie. You're in a good part of the state for food.
You bet I am.
Do you have a favorite restaurant?
My kitchen.
Oh, okay. You cook too.
But it's interesting because last night I had lunch with some friends today, and last night there's a really interesting local restaurant in a place called Geyserville, which, trust me when I tell you, Geyserville, if you look it up, it's like a wide spot in the road. It's quite small. And there's a restaurant there, and the chef owner has special nights where they do special dinners. And my husband and I last night went with some friends, and they did a special dinner that was all themed around sake tasting. Ooh. And it was quite fantastic. It was really, really good. And we went to another one that he did back in February for Valentine's Day that was chocolate themed. And it was, every course had chocolate in it, not necessarily sweet, but chocolate. Also fantastic. And, they do a lot of very creative things. It's a lot of fun to participate in those kinds of events. And there's a lot of that up here.
So last question, what is a dream project that you'd love to see realized?
A dream project that I'd love to see realized. My next one. Things that are challenging, thinking, being able to participate in creating something that people really love. I mean, to me, that's the greatest thrill there is. I mean, when I go to a hotel, if I hear people saying positive things, that to me is the greatest reward there is. It really is. Accepting the fact that it's a business and, all of that, the emotional part of me just loves, because I love entertaining people and I also have lots of house guests all the time. So I'm sort of a hotelier, I guess, a junior hotelier myself. So I just love all of that. I just love making people feel good and being in spaces that they really like, and just to hang out in the lobby and hear people walk in and go, wow, this is so cool. That just does it for me. Okay. Thanks, Courtney.
This has been so fun.
To you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. See you later. Bye-bye.